Okay, so you have a specific scenario to talk about. You wrote about a hawk that was incomplete in a tournament. Is that still the scenario you want to discuss?
Yeah, it seemed like a really concrete thing that was like much debated on the sideline and would love to just like I actually really enjoyed your like the email that you sent about like, fast throws for slow cuts and slow
Mhm.
cuts. And I was like, and so I was actually thinking about it in the context of that. I was like, oh, that was a specific decision that I made as a thrower. And it was, yeah, it was much debated on whether it was a good decision and bad execution or bad execution and a good decision or vice versa.
Right, right, right. Okay, interesting. Okay, so then what I'd like to do is I'd like to, kind of try, our method of kind of like we just call it a post-reflective practice, post-play reflective practice. We need a better name. Anyway, we're just going to try to do this, slow it down, and I'm going to ask you, you know, I might ask you a few dumb questions, but basically we're going to try to get a diagnosis here for you.
Great.
Um, Great. Okay, so what I see, what I understand is that you made a hawk, it was incomplete. Yes, and there was a lot of discussion. So tell me more. Tell me, where were you when you made this decision, and what did you see?
So first, just like taking a step back, who we were. So we were a mostly masters. Like the team that I was playing on is mostly masters age, and we were playing against mostly 20 somethings. So
Okay.
that's an important distinction.
Okay.
Um, and we were running a hex,
Hmm.
um, and I received the disc in power position
Okay.
about a third to the half, third at about like a third of the field, maybe half field.
Okay.
And what I saw was my receiver, behind his guy by 2 to 3 steps.
Hmm.
Um, roughly in the middle of the field, cutting towards sort of the back cone.
Hmm.
And he was open by 2 or 3 yards.
Hmm.
Um,
And
and
were you in the center, or were you on one side or the other?
I was sort of like left, slightly left of center,
Okay.
maybe a third field. I wasn't on the sideline. It wasn't like
Uh-huh.
the same field. It wasn't the same third throw.
Okay.
Um, so like I had space, he had space. I was throwing to space. He had
Uh-huh.
2 to 3 steps on his defender.
Okay.
Um, and his defender, like, and he's like my receiver was a reliable receiver who was definitely slower. Like, so like that was the thing. Everybody was
Hmm.
like, come on, like his defender was gonna catch up.
Okay.
Um, and I was like, no, actually, like he had position, he's a reliable receiver, he was open, and if I had made a good throw,
Hmm.
um, like there was it was a high probability chance of completion. Um, I just made a
Okay.
bad throw.
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So do you remember how you felt like either right before or kind of during the throw? And by what you felt, I mean like feelings would be like confident, sure, worried, rushed, pressure, nervous. Like these are would be like feelings you might feel. So do you happen to remember?
Yeah, so I was pressured.
Okay.
And actually that is something like that did like it affected the throw because I short armed like the reason it was a bad execution was because I short armed the throw instead of taking the contact. Like
Mm-hmm.
I had an open backhand, but my defender was coming over quickly to cut it off. And so I was pressured and rushed, I think.
Okay. All right. So you felt pressured and rushed, and then you didn't take contact on the throw. Instead, you avoided contact and did not
Yep.
have good mechanics. Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, so it sounds like the debate that happened on the sideline after was about was that just a poor choice, or was it a good choice with poor execution? And like, maybe it's possible that that's not actually like where most of the benefits of a conversation could happen, right? So what I'm seeing here is like what I try to do for folks is to figure out, is there an error in how we're collecting information? Is there an error in what we think that information means?
Hmm.
Or is there some some like mental error, basically, like, or mental or emotional interference that interferes with our natural skill set, right?
Hmm.
Now, I think it based on this repetition, based on what you've told me, we can't tell whether or not it was we don't exactly get all the data, because what happened was the throw wasn't executed because at least partially there was some mental interference, right? And so mental interference is something that sort of like doesn't allow us to express our actual skills. Now, that's not to say that your throw would have been perfect without the mental interference, but we would have a more accurate assessment of like what the actual throwing skill was, and then we would get feedback on where did the disc go, and would your person actually beat the defender, right? But we don't have any of that. All we have is like what happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, so again, like I mean, I think I already said this, but it's just like you have a certain throwing skill, but you weren't
Yeah.
able to exhibit it possibly because you were feeling pressure and you were feeling like other things.
Yeah.
Okay, so now my next
Yeah,
question
like
is,
maybe
oh yeah,
that's the. Oh no, it just makes me think that like we were like the thing we were debating was like whether was it a good decision or not based on the receiver and the receiver's position and the receiver's matchup. But
uh-huh.
really, the question was maybe it was a bad decision, but it was a bad decision because I was under pressure, which is
Mm,
different than like
mm,
whether the receiver was open or not. Like
mm,
that,
mhm.
I hadn't actually considered that like it wasn't actually bad execution. It was actually a bad decision. Do you know what I
Ah,
mean?
yeah. So you're saying, well, like, there's no way, or like, based on like what you recall, there would not have. I mean, maybe you're thinking is there would not have been a way to get the throw off based on the pressure of the mark. Like, there wouldn't
Yeah.
have been a way to do that. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Or like even it wasn't an actual open throw.
Mm, mhm. Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if the throw had been open, like if I hadn't been under pressure from a mark,
Hmm.
um, to your point, like we actually don't know if it was an error in execution or not because there was a prior.
Hmm.
I don't know if I'm making any sense, but
Yeah. No, I think we're on the same page. Yeah, it's maybe different ways of saying the same thing. The error wasn't in just like purely in execution. Maybe the error was in decision because there was not a window to execute properly.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay, great. So yeah, so that's interesting. That's fun.
Yeah. But can I ask you about the hypothetical? Like, if it had been open, like, if I could, like, because like that's a throw. If I'm unmarked, I
Mhm.
make that throw, 95% of the time. Like, that's a very high percentage throw for me. But like,
Yeah.
I guess what I'm wondering about is, and maybe there's two things we can explore. But like, but like, if that throw is open, does like that setup sound like a good decision or not? Do you know what I
Well,
mean?
right. So I totally get what you're doing. Like you're wanting external validation either, or like a yes no, right? But so again, I think my focus is more about the process, right? I'm not going to give you an answer. Sorry.
Fair.
What else? I wasn't
And
there. But I think like, the process is like, let's say you were feeling confident. You had the disc power position, you felt confident, you executed, you were like, yeah, this is going to be a score. And then it wasn't, right?
yeah,
Then the conversation I would be having about like, okay, well, why did your brain view that pattern as a score and it wasn't, right? And then
mm,
maybe we'd have a discussion about, oh, well, okay, yeah, we were playing 20 somethings, and okay, so next time I'm on a master's team playing 20 somethings, maybe I'd recognize that pattern a little better. Or the discussion would be, you threw it, you were confident, you threw it exactly how you wanted it, and it was a completion. And then there'd be no discussion, like nobody would say anything,
yeah,
because people tend not to say anything about things that often go well, right? And then the further discussion would be more about like not this one decision or one scenario in isolation, but also about recognizing patterns, right? So it's like, you know if you're commonly throwing it to your receivers and the defense is catching up, well, then you definitely have established that there's a pattern. That means there's an overall problem in like your mental map of like your pattern recognition in these scenarios. But if it just happens once, it's more like a data point,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
It may not mean you need to change anything.
That makes sense.
Yeah. All right. How's that feel? Unsatisfying? Satisfying?
No, no, I think it does make sense. I'm trying like I feel like maybe I brought it like an unsatisfactory example or question then,
It's a great example.
and so like I'm trying to then like I'm trying to like hear what you're saying and like wonder about like what's a similar um well maybe what you're getting at is like the thing that I didn't recognize is that um I thought it was an open throw, but it actually wasn't. And the evidence for that is the fact that I short armed it.
Right. And the fact that you felt pressured, right? So here's like one of the kind of underpinning beliefs I have is that, you know, so I talk a lot about training your sports brain. And your sports brain is where all the knowledge is, basically, when you're on the ultimate field. And your sports brain can communicate to you in feelings, right? That's the only way it can't communicate in words. That's how we know what it's quote unquote thinking. So it's like when a player goes into a scenario and they're feeling like sure, or they're feeling confident, then we have a good repetition that's getting us good data. But if they're
Mm-hmm.
going in with the feeling of confusion or rushed or whatever, then the only information we're getting is like, oh, well, what's the mental process interfering, right? And so, so for example, if that was a pattern for you, I mean, for all players, like I think there's patterns of like when we feel pressured, we don't have good throwing mechanics. When we feel that pressure, it's telling us the throw's not there, right? That's something you can learn. Like your body knows or has opinions about whether this throw is actually viable or open or not. And what your body told you is the cutter was open, but you didn't
Yeah.
have the throw. That's why you felt like this pressure, this rushedness, right? Yeah, so let's see. So I think it's a good example because we kind of ended up at maybe a different place than you expected. And I think the conversation that you and your teammates have on the sideline is like so common, like people trying to figure out, well, like trying to diagnose based on the result, like, yeah, was it a good decision or not? And it's like, well, that's I just often find that those discussions, it's like, well, if you ask 3 or 4 different people, you're gonna have 3 or 4 different opinions. But the knowledge is actually like within you. Like, what
Yeah.
did you see? What did you feel? What happened?
Yeah.
And we don't get to a right wrong answer because we're getting some information from this data point. But as far as like for that specific situation, is there a right wrong answer? It's like, well, you know, who knows, but also like who cares? Right? Because it's about like what can we do? Like what can we learn that's gonna help us get better for
Yeah.
next time around.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, like the thing that I'm thinking about is so I've done a lot of work with my daughter on like dialectical behavioral therapy, which is like there's it's a lot about understanding underlying emotions and identifying them and understanding like their impact as well as holding like two things being true at once. That's the dialectical part. And so it's just really funny to like be on a Zoom call talking about ultimate um, and really like hearing what you're talking about is like principles of mindfulness and like um yeah, anyways that's the thing that's occurring to me
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah, I think it's super fun. It's super fun because yeah, I mean our bodies, our brains know a lot, and people aren't really taught how to interpret that or how to use that,
Yeah.
to their advantage. Instead, we try to have these logical discussions on the sideline that don't
Right.
necessarily lead to improved performance.
Right. Interesting. What
Cool.
else
All right.
occurs to you, or has this been like was this at all interesting or helpful to you?
Yeah, no, I think this is an interesting example for exactly the reason that I said. It's like where you expected to end up isn't where we ended up, right? We didn't. well, wait, oh no, you're not first. Yeah, where we ended up maybe in a slightly different place than what we expected. And for me, like that's exactly where all the interesting, fun stuff is.
Cool. Well, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, excellent. All right. I think this is going to be interesting to other folks as well. So I'll stop the recording here.